Now, after EPA, fatty acids, and phosphatidylserine, I would say third on the list of things that come from food that can readily support brain function would be choline. Some of the most frequent questions I get are about food and the brain. Everybody seems to want to know what they should eat and what they shouldn't eat in order to have peak brain function, to be able to focus and memorize things and so forth, and in order to maintain brain health over time, because nobody wants to lose their memory or have troubles with cognition. Fortunately, there are a lot of data now from really good quality peer-reviewed studies that indicate certain things that we can do, including certain foods that we should eat and perhaps even some foods that we should avoid in order to enhance our brain function. And that brings us to what I would argue is the most important food element for brain function, and that is fat. And that might come as a surprise, but unless one considers the water content of the brain, which is very high, a lot of our brain and a lot of the integrity of the nerve cells, the so-called neurons in our brain, and the other types of cells comes from fat. And that's because nerve cells and other cells in the brain have a external layer. It's what's sometimes called a double-layered membrane. It's essentially two thin layers that serve as a boundary between those cells, and that boundary is very important because how things pass across that boundary actually regulates the electrical activity of neurons, which is the way that neurons fire and communicate and keep you thinking and acting and doing all the good things that those neurons allow us to do. And those membranes are made up of fats, but they're not made up of the fats that are around our belly, around the other organs of our body. They're not made up of storage fat. They are made up of structural fat. And maintaining the so-called integrity of that structural fat, meaning the health of those neurons, is going to come in large part from the foods that we eat. Now, this needs to be underscored. What I'm saying is that the foods that we eat actually provide the structural basis, the building blocks of the very neurons that allow us to think over time. And as I mentioned earlier, the fat that makes up those neurons and other nerve cells is different than the other types of fat in the body. So what type of fat is it, and what should we eat in order to support that fat and those neurons? And the answer is the so-called essential fatty acids and phospholipids. Now, those are more or less the same thing, but I just want to make a very large literature very crystal clear. Essential fatty acids can include the so-called EPA variety or DHA variety. You hear about omega-3s and omega-6s. Most people are getting enough omega-6s from their diet. Not everybody, but most people are getting enough omega-6s. However, most people are not getting enough omega-3s in their diet to support healthy brain function in the short and long term. I've talked before about the benefits of elevating the levels of omega-3s in one's diet for sake of offsetting depression and for enhancing mood. And indeed, there's a wealth of literature now pointing to the fact that ingesting at least 1 or 2 or even 3 grams per day of EPA form of essential fatty acid can have positive effects on mood and well-being that are at least on par with some of the major antidepressant treatments out there, but without similar side effects to those antidepressant treatments. And that for people that are already taking antidepressants, that supplementing with 1 to 2 to 3 grams of EPA essential fatty acids can actually allow a lower dose of antidepressant treatment to be used and still be effective. What are foods that are high in omega-3s that we should all probably be consuming at least on a daily basis? The number one is fish. So things like mackerel and salmon and herring and oysters and sardines and anchovies, and perhaps the heavyweight champion of EPAs per unit volume is caviar. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not eating a lot of fish. I'm not eating a lot of caviar. I can't remember the last time I had a caviar unless it was sprinkled on a little bit of sushi. I'm not a big fish eater personally. I will from time to time, but that's one reason why one might want to supplement with EPAs from another source. But also, EPAs are found in chia seeds, in walnuts, in soybeans, and other plant-based foods. You can look these up online, and you'll immediately see that there are a lot of sources of EPAs. And many of the foods that I listed off might be appetizing to you. Some of them might be unappetizing to you, or some of them you might be sort of neutral about. But it's very clear that eating foods that are rich in omega-3s and or supplementing with omega-3s to get above that 1.5 grams and ideally up to 2 or even 3 grams per day of EPA can be very beneficial for cognitive function in the short and long term. The other compound that has been shown to be directly supportive of neuronal function is phosphatidylserine, which is abundant in meats and in fish. So here we are again, back to fish being an important source of brain-supporting food. Phosphatidylserine is something that nowadays people are supplementing. It's a lipid-like compound that, at least in 3 studies, have been shown to improve cognition. These weren't huge effects, but they were statistically significant effects. And as well, in more than 3, at least 5 studies to reduce cognitive decline. And this is interesting. In every case, it was 300 milligrams supplemented phosphatidylserine, but one, again, doesn't need to supplement phosphatidylserine. Phosphatidylserine can be derived, as I mentioned, from meats and fish, and to some extent from cabbage, of all things. So I don't know how much cabbage people are ingesting, but later when we talk about gut health and the relationship between gut health and brain health, I'll mention fermented foods, and of course one of the most readily available fermented foods out there that at least many people find appetizing is sauerkraut, which is of course made from cabbage. It's fermented cabbage. Now, after EPA, fatty acids, and phosphatidylserine, I would say third on the list of things that come from food that can readily support brain function would be choline. And that's because of the relationship to choline in the biosynthesis pathway for acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a neuromodulator, not a neurotransmitter, but a neuromodulator in the brain. A neuromodulator is a chemical that modulates the function of many brain circuits and also circuits within the body. I'll mention what those are in a moment, but acetylcholine as a neuromodulator tends to enhance the activity, the electrical activity and chemical activity of certain sets of neurons and downplay the activity of other neurons. So it's sort of a conductor of sorts, leading to enhanced function and activity in certain brain areas and circuits and not in others. For instance, the brain areas that are involved in focus and alertness. We have multiple clusters of neurons in our brain that make acetylcholine. 2 of the most prominent and well-known are the so-called nucleus basalis, which is a cluster of neurons deep in the basal forebrain that highlight particular areas of our brain. Highlight meaning when acetylcholine is released from those neurons at their nerve endings in particular areas of the brain, those particular areas of the brain can undergo enhanced levels of activity relative to surrounding areas. So it's kind of a electrical highlighter pen, if you will, by analogy. That is the basis of much of what we call focus, or our ability to concentrate on a particular batch of information that's coming in through our eyes, our ears, our nose, or even things that we're just thinking in our head. So having ample choline for production of acetylcholine allows for focus through, of course, many intervening steps. Eggs are a rich source of choline. Some people will supplement with choline. However, food sources seem to be the best source of choline. And as with the EPAs and the omega-3s, there are plenty of foods that are non-animal based that contain choline. So if you're somebody who doesn't eat eggs or doesn't want to eat eggs, things like potatoes, nuts, and seeds, and grains and fruit, they don't have as much choline as eggs, but they do contain choline. So you can look up the values of choline that are present in those various foods and make sure that you're reaching the threshold amount of choline for you. In general, most people should probably strive to get somewhere between 500 milligrams and a gram of choline per day, so 1,000 milligrams. And some people rely on supplementation in order to hit those levels because they're not eating a lot of egg yolks or they're not eating a lot of other foods. Certain fish contain choline, for instance, and the other foods I listed off a few minutes ago from plant-based sources. So some people will supplement with 50 to 100 milligrams or whatever amount is necessary to get them up to that 1 gram or even a 2 gram dose per day. So we have 3 things that we know can support nerve cells. EPA, in particular omega-3 fatty acids, phosphatidylserine, and choline. Those 3 things I would list off as the top 3 things for enhancing neuron function and the integrity of neurons in the short and long term.
Thanks for watching. If you found this information helpful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more health and wellness tips.